Just before we begin this forum, I'd like to invite Dr. Eklavya Sharma, Director of Programme Operations at ICIMOD, who's going to give you an overview of ICIMOD's engagement with the private sector. Dr. Sharma. Round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to all of you. A very exciting forum for us to discuss what we don't want to do in future, what is different in future. For that reason, ICIMOD has been interacting and engaging with private sector for the last 3 years, and we have actually been able to show some partnership. Recently, some of the partnerships are actually going on the ground, so that's quite encouraging development that we are having. Before I go to some of those examples, maybe some of the expectations that we see from this particular session, I would like to say here to the panelists as well as to the audience participants. I think this is one of the first dialogue forever that we are organizing in terms of ICIMOD in such a big forum. So that's very, very interesting for us. We see that this is an opportunity for us to see innovations in engaging private sector in the inclusive development. So the way we are going to put the recommendation in the final day tomorrow, we would like to see this session will also contribute how we would like to move in future. Then we also see that private sector is one of the responsible agent of change in a positive direction for people as well as environment security. I think this is more and more we see private sector has to come in this direction, and the knowledge partner is going to be quite critical, and institutions like ICIMOD has a very important role to play if the private sector has to play that role in future. Then the private sector partnership, of course, which we are discussing and developing for last few years, we see, I think this relationship is quite important if we are thinking of sustainable means of work at the national level, regional level. So there is a sustainability component and impact component. If we work with youth, there is definitely economic development. There is definitely, if we look into the environment safety in some of our programs, then we can link both environment and development and balance that very much. So that is what we would like to see. Institutionally, ICIMOD, in our strategy, we support engagement of private sector partnership, and one of the pillars which we see is societal benefit and environmental security that can come through this partnership. So some of the examples, if we can see what is developing in private sector, is in our Kailash Sacred Landscape. We are working in India with routers very much in Kailash Sacred Landscape to really bring information on agriculture related production, marketing, and also the environmental issues. So that type of partnership is actually developing, and we see very much promise in terms of getting the information to direct stakeholders. In Nepal also we have worked on the agriculture market information here with FNCCI, and this has shown some good progress for future. So I see in our value chain also we have worked with many small market private sectors, and there we have seen that our benefits that can really can bring to this partnership. There is a win-win situation, and we can do something for the target beneficiaries. Lastly, I think one more point that I would like to say in the context of ICIMOD is that we have ICIMOD Foundation, which has a separate governance than ICIMOD itself, and here there is an opportunity very much for private sector if they can have plans or activities relating to corporate social responsibility. That is the place where we could actually put resources and then serve the mission of ICIMOD through ICIMOD itself. So there is a really good opportunity to use the ICIMOD Foundation for the private sector to put some of the possibilities of funding the overall strategy of ICIMOD. And lastly, I think the private sector initiatives, if you want to really push ahead in terms of getting impact, I think knowledge is quite important. And ICIMOD is working on various aspects of development, whether it is related to water or biodiversity, or related to disaster and impacts on the people, or the niche products that are coming from the mountains, and all the potentials of development both in the mountains and downstreams, then I think knowledge is going to be quite critical. ICIMOD has been working in this region for 30 years. We are now celebrating 30 years anniversary now. And this knowledge and the knowledge products which we are preparing can be optimally used in developing this partnership and the experience. And ICIMOD can also bring or convene the technical experts with private experts and the actual beneficiaries through various programs at the regional scale, not only national or local level, but also regional scale. I think these are some good opportunities, and I would say that I see a great future with the private partnership. And I would like to stop here because we would like to listen more from the partners here as panelists. Thank you very much.
So just before we begin our dialogue, I'd like to call on Dr. Drupad Chaudhary, who is the convener of this conference, and he's going to talk very briefly about the importance of the involvement of the private sector at this conference. Dr. Chaudhary.
We are already eating into the time of the forum, so I won't take very long. Dr. Sharma has already laid the ground of why we wanted this forum in here. And if you look at normally when we look at conferences on poverty and vulnerability on development, the private sector is the actor which is missing in these forums. And we thought we have to bring in the private sector because you see the question that we are asking. If we don't bring that in, we have heard the whole day today the importance of linking up with the private sector. And let's hear it from the panelists here. That was the objective of why we have this forum here in the conference.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce the moderator for this dialogue, Ms. Leena Wokeck, and she is currently Executive Director of CSR Asia, a regional social business, working with the private sector on business solutions to global challenges. CSR has 7 offices all over Asia, and Leena is based in Bangkok. She's also head of partnership with the Asian Institute of Technology, and she's been in Asia for 4.5 years. Before, she worked for a global organisation, the Global Reporting Initiative, looking at transparency and accountability in the private sector. In terms of her academic background, she has a master's in political economics from the Free University of Amsterdam, and she studied cultural anthropology and international law. The focus of her work is looking at changing business practices and moving towards more effective business strategies that address issues like poverty and vulnerability. And she works with private companies, NGOs, and development partners. So a round of applause for the moderator, please, Ms. Wokeck. So now I'm going to ask Ms. Wokeck to introduce her panel, and then, just before you begin the dialogue, I'm going to ask Dr. Sharma to welcome you all with a welcome scarf. So, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. In fact, what I'm actually going to do is let the panelists introduce themselves, because I think they can do that much more eloquently than I can, and know much more what they would like to focus on, rather than me reading their bios. So maybe let's dive straight into that. To my left, I have Dr. Hemant Tripathi, the Director General of FNCCI.
Thank you. I am Hemant Tripathi. I am currently with the Federation of Nepalese Chambers of Commerce and Industry. It is sort of a national organization of the business in this country, and we are involved in all sectors, representation of all sectors. And by training, economist. I did my master's and PhD in economics, and that too in a country which doesn't exist today, that is Soviet Union. So after doing the degree in economics from the Marxist economic perspective. I am working with the private sector and in the interest of the private sector, basically, for quite a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To his left, we have Mr. Anand Baragia, the Managing Director of Nimbus Holdings Private Limited.
I am Anand Bavaria. I work for this organization called Nimbus. Nimbus is primarily into agribusinesses with its core being the feed milling sector. So on one side we work with the livestock farmers, the poultry farmers and the cattle farmers. And on the other side our raw material is agri-grain. So we work with the agriculture sector as well. Our challenge always remains that we keep them efficient and we keep them keep our supply chain as well as our clients, buyers, keep them, as in business terms, keep them healthy and fit. So that is what is our business, and we believe that instead of competing with them, we would like to make them our partners and strengthen them further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To my right, I have Mr. Ashok Nair, who is Vice President Operations at Reuters Marketlight.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Ashok. I work with Reuters Marketlight. It's a company based out of Mumbai, where we provide information services to the farming community across India. We are operational in 17 states in India, and we have recently got into an MOU with ICIMOD, and we look forward to working with ICIMOD as well as part of the Kailash Sacred Landscape Development Initiative. By training, I'm an agriculturist. I've done my post-graduation in plant breeding from G.B. Pant University, Nainital, and I have been in the agribusiness sector, ranging from seed production to vegetable production, export of seeds, to wholesale and retail of F&B, fruits and vegetables. And I have been with Reuters for the past 4 years, driving their initiative of passing on very localized, very customized information services to the farming community. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally on the right, we have Ambassador Curtis Chin, who is the former U.S. Ambassador to the Asian Development Bank.
Thank you, Leena. It's great to be here. People know me most because of my role on the board of directors of the Asian Development Bank, actually voting on and visiting all 8 countries that are members of ICIMOD, looking at public-private partnerships, infrastructure, finance. But the reality is that most of my career, and I'm back in it, is in the private sector. I was for many years with a large government relations public affairs firm called Burson Marsteller. And there my focus was on working with major multinationals, some smaller businesses, and even some governments on this notion of responsible investment. And so it's great to be here and bring a perspective both from a government Asian Development Bank role, a private sector role, and also my role on the board of several nonprofit civil society organizations. So it's again good to be here. Thank you, Leena.
Thank you. So now, just before you begin, I'd like to call on Dr. Sharma to welcome the participants of the panel on behalf of ICIMOD.
We start with the center.
Very much, Dr. Sharma. So now we'll hand over to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I hand over to our speakers, let me just take a few minutes to introduce the topic and also the set of questions that we've been asked to address in this session by ICIMOD. To set the scene, I thought maybe let me dissect the fairly long title of the session into three elements. What are we talking about in this session today? I think the first very much relates to the overall theme of this conference and the topic of responsible and inclusive development. And specifically, obviously, in this session, what role for business in that context? We've heard quite a few perspectives from NGOs, from government partners, on what their perspectives are on the role of the private sector. But what we have in this panel, I think, is really getting the business representatives and the chamber and someone who has a long career in the private sector as well, to talk about their views on what role for business in sustainable development and how do we as business representatives understand these issues in the first place. And secondly, we're talking about approaches to partnering, partnerships between governments and development agencies with the private sector, and how we very concretely and very practically we go about working together and bringing together very different types of actors, which frankly often speak very different languages, how we really tackle that in a practical manner. And thirdly, and I think most importantly, how do we re-understand good business practices? How do we understand sustainable business practices that focus not only on responsibility and looking at minimizing or mitigating potentially negative impacts on societies, on the environment, on economies, but starting to think beyond that? How can we envisage business strategies that create meaningful and measurable impacts towards addressing poverty and vulnerability whilst still being profitable business models? Because of course we are talking about business strategies and we're not asking companies to become development agencies. We're looking at really this space where we can look at viable business models that nevertheless, or even more so in an efficient and effective manner, address development challenges. Which is why I think this third focus is actually key here. And I think key is also that it sets the stage for moving away from examples of business engagement where we've often, I think, understood the role of business in addressing poverty and vulnerability as charity and as philanthropy, as an add-on, nice-to-do element of what companies could be doing. Valuable as that may be in some cases, I think what we ought to be talking about here today is how business makes the money in the first place and where the interlinkages are between doing business, what areas we're doing business in, and looking at how that affects sustainable development in the region and how that affects poverty and vulnerability. And what that probably means is quite a fundamental rethinking of business as usual, to look at new ways of doing business and maybe a more longer-term perspective. And for that, of course, I think it's absolutely essential to have businesses in the room and to start a dialogue on what that means from a business perspective and how we can start understanding each other around some of these areas where we assume that we have common goals on sustainable development. The private sector undoubtedly has been one of the biggest poverty alleviators in the past few decades. I think the key question, though, is how can we harness this capacity to direct investments towards really sustainable and inclusive growth strategies? And that's very much what these questions that ICIMOD have asked us to address in this session are all about. So, if I may ask the panelists in the few minutes that they have for their remarks to address the following kind of key topics. To what extent do they see the private sector as a key actor, not just in driving investment and growth, but also the policies that set the rules of the game, if you will? To what extent do we think that it is a good thing towards ensuring that the rules of the game become more effective in enabling inclusive growth and an environment that's conducive to addressing poverty and vulnerability, with business playing a key role in that context. And what is needed to ensure that investment in mountain areas, which currently is probably comparatively low, is increased? How do we go about that in a way that develops business strategies that not only focus on more or less responsible investment in mountain resources, but really a shift towards much more inclusive strategies for sustainable development in these areas? And that's, I think, where we can really get a lot from the panelists, some very concrete examples of business strategies that make business sense while creating the types of impacts we're looking for mountain communities and mountain ecosystems. And that's why I'm hoping that especially the representatives from the companies can give us some very concrete examples on how they are going about this, what they've learned, what the rationales from their perspective are. And ideally also focus in that context specifically on challenges and opportunities for really inclusivity in the sense of addressing vulnerability also and especially of marginalized and disadvantaged communities, and how they can be integrated into profitable business as equitable partners, which no doubt does come with challenges. Finally, I'd like the panelists to focus also on kind of say a few concrete words around what the steps they would recommend to tackle the questions of the session, to tackle strategies for making business an enabler for inclusive development in mountain areas. And specifically, what they would recommend to organizations like ICIMOD to engage the private sector to really translate this into action. We've seen a number of very interesting examples this morning where ICIMOD and its partners are working on some very successful value chain projects. And one of the key questions that came up this morning was, well, how sustainable are they? How sustainable are they beyond the project duration? And one of the comments that was made is that the partnerships with the private sector are actually essential for achieving this sustainability beyond project durations. But in order to achieve that, there obviously needs to be a case for businesses to get involved in that process. And that is very much what I would like also the panelists to focus on. What is your rationale? Why are you interested in this topic? And how do we go about moving that forward from your perspectives? If we could start with you, sir, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, a big thank you to ICIMOD and I have to have this opportunity of sharing the dialogue with many group of speakers. It's a great honor for us, for the private sector, and for me personally. Here I would like to start with the question that is raised in the backdrop that business as usual versus sustainable business, the inclusive business and something. What in the business community we may not be that much well versed as business as usual and inclusive business. What we think is that the business has to survive in the long run. We have to make profit, and we have to survive in the long run. We need the market, and the income of the people need to go up. If we look at generally the misconception, especially among the developmental workers, is that the business goes only where there is large cities, big consumers or high spending consumers. It is not the case. If you look at the fast moving FMCG companies, if you look at their chains, supply chains, what they are working very hard today to go to the rural market to make profit. They will go where the profit is. That is for sure. So business goes where the profit is. And we have to demonstrate that there is profit in each case or something like that. Here the development workers, when we say, the partnership between the development, sustainable business partnership between the development and the business has to be involved. One thing that I would like to see is that we should see some profit. They should learn to talk in the language of the business, that there is profit in each of these activities, and the business should be sustainable in the long run. Sustainable not in the sense of the environment. Generally, when we talk of sustainable business or sustainable development, something like the environmental issues only. But here I am talking about the sustainability of the business itself, the business model itself. That is quite important. And in today's world, businessmen are not fools, and they are not working for only short-term gains as it is perceived. They also would like to look into a long-term survival of their business, their growth, and something on this line. So I think we are interested, we from the business community are interested in the sustainability issue, that we are interested in the inclusive business, that is, but we may not talk in the terms of inclusive business as such in this too. And regarding if we look at what at the FNCCI we have initiated some new initiative during the last couple of years or something. If we go travel to Nepal, most of the larger industries, larger activities are either concentrated in the south of Nepal or even in the south of Nepal towards the eastern Nepal. And if you go west of, let's say, Butwal westwards, almost very few economic activities are taking place in those areas. And if you look at our insurgency problem, the insurgency started in those areas. So if it is the lack of the economic opportunity in that area that led to this problem that we perceive. So as the FNCCI, we have come to the conclusion that we need to devote attention to the development of the district. We need to be creating opportunities in the district itself. And that we have started an initiative called One Village, One District, One Product. It is One Village, One Product that we are. Basically, it is identifying its district with some product and trying to develop that product and have value addition in that. We are looking at what is feasible in that area and how we can create the business. One or two examples. In the southwest of Nepal, there are sweet oranges grown quite well. About 50% of those sweet oranges we call Junar, that seems to be going to the market and they have the market. But almost 50% is getting ruined because they are not of good quality or something like that. So what we are now trying to put a small juice factory around that too, so that the farmers can benefit, the traders can benefit, and we are working in those sort of things, like having, even in that factory, having some percentage of share by the farmers themselves, some percentage of share local businessmen, some percentage of the share by the bigger, department stores in Kathmandu, like bigger businesses in Kathmandu, and some portion to be given as subsidy from the government, from FNCI working out. That sort of thing is being practiced not only in that district, but also we are looking at in far western Nepal. There is one district called Jajarkot. It seems to have semi-valuable precious stones, semi-precious stones. And as of today, these semi-precious stones are being mined and they are put in gunny bags and are being exported. And most probably they are being re-imported into Nepal later on. But we are working in putting some facilities to work on them, so that there will be more value addition and everybody will benefit. So these are some of the initiatives we have started. And one thing that I would like to end, we don't have much time, but one thing I would like to end is that we need to make, for such a business to happen, we need to understand the language of the profit. We need to make, in case of Nepal, what I think, we need to make a lot of entrepreneurs, we need to make a lot of create new businesses, and we need to make the business profession a reputable profession and profit a respectable word. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you also for cutting your remarks short. Unfortunately, our session has been squeezed a little bit, so I've had to ask the speakers to stick to a little bit less time than we had originally aimed for. So thank you very much for that, Dr. Dabadi. I think you've mentioned some very important aspects, namely around, well, businesses will go where markets are, and we're looking at sustainable business models, and we need to look at business models that make business sense, essentially. Maybe you can continue in that vein a little bit, Mr. Mabarakai, to explain what that means for your company and what has worked and where maybe some of the challenges are for you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I see that there are three sectors involved here: the government, the developmental sector, as well as the private sector. Typically, from a private sector perspective, government is something we would be happy if they didn't interfere with the business. Second, the social sector we know nothing about. The developmental sector we know nothing about. In fact, I'm glad that I'm getting to vent out my questions or my inquisitiveness about what the sector does over here. Except for one good note that I carry is these are a bunch of people with good intentions. And another question about inclusive growth when it comes, why certainly for the last few years we've been talking about private sector driven inclusive growth. Why certainly private sector? We talk about inclusive business, we talk about private sector enabled business, we talk about private sector being the driver of the business. Confuses me, or when I say me, I talk on behalf of the private sector tremendously. Makes me wonder, what is the role of the other two then, government and the social sector? Is it to put pressure on us to do business the way they conceive to do, they want us to do? As a private sector, my question would be, are we supposed to be the enablers or are we supposed to be the drivers? I'm sure you guys have clarity on what you guys are saying, but private sector doesn't understand this. For us to understand, you've got to speak our language. As Dr. Dawali just mentioned, profit. We borrow. We need to deliver ROI, return on investment. And we are not a business the moment we forget our ROIs. So, I think it is very important that this sector, with all due respect, needs to speak. If we are to fit into the larger goal, needs to speak our language. When we go to the government, we speak their language because we have our ends to meet with the government. Similarly, if it's a larger goal, probably you need to speak our language and we need to learn your language as well. We have been the engine of growth, but I'm not too sure how we could be the engine of inclusive growth. Because we have our own set of limitations which may be very different from what it could be perceived sitting outside. What I would like to also emphasize here is what we need to understand about private sector is what excites them. For private sector, inclusive growth is very ambiguous. We understand growth, we don't understand inclusive growth. We understand value addition, we understand partnerships. So, and policies don't bother us. Where there is a business happening, policies normally, at least I can vouch for in case of Nepal, follow. They don't proceed. So under pressure, sometimes we give in to CSR, PPP, all those things, but we are driven by our business values. Our bottom lines and our top lines are very, very important to us, and that is the philosophy under which we work. So, for me, let's say if you were to talk about PPP, what is a PPP? To me it is a social sector visualized, government-controlled, private sector, a government-controlled initiative pushed onto the private sector with a idealism note attached to it. We haven't seen too many, there are good examples, but we haven't seen too many of them happen. So, to me, what does an inclusive growth mean? From a private sector perspective, to me, Inclusive growth means creating or attempting synergies, be it with anybody, everybody, bringing or linking the regional advantages of the businesses into the mainstream, scaling up businesses, creating a good ecosystem where cumulatively we do big and efficient business, and participative integration. I can give you a few examples as what we are doing at Nimbus. I mean, there's a lot of business happening everywhere, and sometimes it's not so organized. We being in the poultry sector, I mean, that's our core sector, what we started doing is we started training poultry farmers. And we didn't limit our poultry training to our own farmers. We said it is to the industry. So now, 10 years hence, we have poultry farms in the remotest areas. When we started business, we must have been doing business in about 20 districts of Nepal. Today, we are present in 65, and our product moves to almost about 68, 69 districts. The poultry farmers have become independent. We have created a technical strength in the farms where they can take care of day-to-day technical requirements. We are trying to replicate. We did a second round of the similar exercise with IFC participating in that, and wherein we were IFC's role was to improve the content that was being provided to the farmers. Two more things that we were attempting to do, and one with ICIMOD itself, is development of soybean farming in Nepal. Reason being, we've been importing soybean from India all the while, and there is no reason why I can say that soybean cannot be grown in Nepal. We are a net importer of oil, and all we need to do is produce oil seeds and in turn produce oil for ourselves. We see our role as more of a market providers to the farmers rather than getting into farming ourselves. So we don't want to be competitors to them. We cannot be, because if we want to grow, we need to grow together. So this is our model of inclusiveness. Lastly, I mean, I've already got the times up signal. So we feel that private sector could be the driver, but the government and development sector has to take the responsibility of identifying the linkages and enabling them. They have to play the catalyst role. We need to understand and respect each other better by creating more examples for ourselves first and then for others. Thank you.
Thank you very much for some very, I think, useful and frank remarks, starting with obviously this focus on we need to speak the same language. We need to actually understand each other and understand what exactly are each other's roles if we really are to work together more effectively. So thank you very much for that. Another very interesting example and lots of experience in putting these challenging things into action. We'll hear from Mr. Nair from Reuters Market Life.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Anand has said half of what I was supposed to say, but anyway, what I'll do is let me again just re-emphasize the fact that we as a private player are into whatever we do for profit. We are into business. We also are very aware that unless the end beneficiary benefits, we would not be in the business for too long. And in our case, the end beneficiary is the farmer. And it's not farmer of a particular district in a particular states. It's farmers across 17 states in India, some states as big or bigger than some European nations. And I would just like to illustrate here where we have made some amazing inroads into working with farmers. And before that, I would just like to say that it's very important for us to synergize with various stakeholders in the agri-value chain. And these are not farmers alone. These could be government agencies, these could be quasi-government, these could be NGOs. But then unless there are synergies which are visible to both players, it doesn't really play out. At the end of the long chain, or at the end of the road is a farmer waiting for to see what kind of benefits he could derive. So I would just like to give you some examples of what we've done in the hill state of Uttarakhand we worked with 3 partners, with 3 agencies, what we prefer to call them partners. We've worked with GIZ, we've worked with the Department of Telecommunication in India, central government body. We have worked with NABARD, the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. And what we have done is, besides giving farmers information on how to grow a better crop, how to get better yields, how to take care of the vagaries of nature, through different information services that we provide, we've also gone further ahead, giving them, advisories, giving them content on enhancement of their livelihood. A case I would like to quote is work we have done with women self-help groups in the state of Uttarakhand, where the focus group was just women who come from the marginalized and the poorer sects of society, where we have given them information, where we have disseminated content on better nutrition, better health and hygiene, better education, aspects of financial literacy. When I talk about financial literacy, I'm just talking about just touching it at the surface. How do you go to a bank? How do you open an account? What is a savings account? Trust me, there are people who never would have even entered a bank. But today, with that knowledge, they feel more proud, they feel strong. Then, what we have recently been doing for the past couple of months is we have been trying to connect the poor and marginal farmers to the market players. And thereby, we have seen farmer groups which are formed in small villages. A classical example is one in West Bengal, 6 districts around Calcutta, where we had the poorest and the most marginalized farmers forming farm interest groups, bringing together the produce they cultivate and all fruits and vegetables, highly perishable stuff, taking it to the produce, to the agents, to the market, to the traders, and deriving benefits ranging from 1% to 23%. And trust me, we have done away with 2 to 3 layers of intermediaries. And with every layer of intermediary you do away with, you get almost 1 to 2% margins. And this is now moving on its own. We started this program in July, and I'm proud to say that we've completed 100 transactions last month. And best part, the icing on the cake, is that today, one of the leading industrial houses in India, which is centered out of Calcutta, the RP Goenka Group, one of their biggest retail chains, has come to us and said, we would like to work with those marginal farmers because they understand what quality is, they understand what consistency is, and they understand what we require. Rather than going to a trader or going to a commission agent and trying to teach him the same stuff time and again. However, what I would like to emphasize on is that what we are in business for is to go the long haul. We would like to work with the lower sects of society, the poorer sects of society. Not that we do not address the progressive farmers and the well-to-do farmers. Uttarakhand, the state of Uttarakhand, has the privilege, or otherwise you could mention that, it has the poorest of the farmers, the most marginalized, and amongst the most progressive farmers. If you go to the Tarai region of Uttarakhand, you have some of the most prosperous and flourishing farmers you've ever known. Some as good, if not better, than their American counterparts. And if you go to the higher regions, the hilly regions, you find people who are very marginal, for whom getting a linkage to the market means probably everything in the world. However, we would like to just re-emphasize that we are here to provide better benefits to the beneficiary, as well as derive some profits in the process. And I hope we will be able to make our stand in the months and years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think another example, and I think very helpful emphasis on having to really look for those synergies. Where can we function as successful businesses whilst at the same time meeting some of those needs of local farmers and the business models that go with it? Thank you very much. Ambassador Chin, the word's yours.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and keep it short, but wanted to echo some of my fellow panelists' comments. I think one big challenge is that we all speak different languages, and there's actually a lack of respect. I was talking to one of the people in the audience, and they said, what are you doing here? And I said, actually, of course, I have an ADDX hat, but I have a private sector hat. And the reply was, oh, you're one of the bad guys. And I think we all need to move beyond these stereotypes. Because, I've been lucky enough in my career to work in the private sector, in government, and with civil society. And if I were to sum up the views of each of the other, business bad, civil society naive, government corrupt. And so the new lingo these days is not public-private partnerships, it's this tri-sector partnership. But the view is this tri-sector partnership is a partnership of the bad, the naive, and the corrupt. We're really not getting anywhere. So to be prescriptive, so how do we build that respect and understanding? I think, and I congratulate ICIMOD, this is the first step. It's probably like 55 minutes to 4 days of a forum, but it is an important first step. ICIMOD began 3 years ago to reach out to the private sector. And I would say to ICIMOD, and I would say to all of you, you also need to understand that the private sector is not one thing. I've been and worked in all these 8 countries that make up ICIMOD. I have family businesses, which are still in a very traditional, when I think about their notion of responsibility. It is a traditional sense sometimes of a corporate responsibility, philanthropy, help my community. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then I also deal, and most of my career has been dealing with advising multinationals on what they should be doing, where they should be. Very different, evaluations of what I would encourage them to support and give. Is it linked to the business? Do people understand why we're doing this? Do our customers care? Do our shareholders care? And then even in some of the discussions over these last 2 days, some people think business is a state-owned enterprise. And in some ways, a state-owned enterprise does act like a business, but the reality, government will ultimately decide what that state-owned enterprise will be focusing on. And so I think we all need to understand what we mean by the private sector. And I would say to each of you, then think through who we want to target. And so, when I've been in my old marketing hat, I would say the most important thing is one, your message. What are we trying to say? But more importantly, who are we trying to reach? And who are we trying to save to? And so as ICIMOD and others think about what are the businesses most likely to be the ones that would partner with them first, I think the reality is that you, not business, have to make the business case. And so I think as a business person, I love data, I love research. And again, to be prescriptive, I look at these bookshelves here of all these ICIMOD reports, and I was saying to some of my fellow panelists, I don't know if most business people would read any of these reports. I'm not saying that they aren't read, because maybe you all, government, civil society, read them, and maybe that's the audience for these reports. But if I'm a business person, I would think, wouldn't it be great if ICIMOD gave me some data that actually then I don't have to pay for, about some of the unique things that I would get from these mountain communities? Because the reality, I go to some of these forums, and they use the same language to justify different things. The United Nations has the Small Island States Conference and meetings about how they're so unique. I go to places and they talk about coastal communities, why we need to focus first on coastal communities, because they're less resilient and more prone to some of the natural disasters that too often hit Asia. And so when I talk to government and I talk to civil society, they also are so diverse. Wearing my old Asian Development Bank hat, I can tell you that in dealing with actually the governments of the 8 nations that make up ICIMOD, I don't think any ever said to me, my priority is the mountain areas. Their priorities are roads, bridges, water supplies for large urban areas. And so we need to think through what influences some of these actors. And so from a business perspective, if I worry about government, it's because I'm fearful they're going to regulate me to death. So I'm going to think through what should I be doing that government will like and respect. And usually it has nothing to do with the mountain community. It's can you help me in my urban area, or help me where my voters are from, or other reasons that have nothing to do with what you all have been talking about these last 2 years. So, think about, again, your messaging, who you're trying to reach, but also think about what business is, and businesses and everything, and maybe you're going to have to begin with businesses from Nepal or India, because working with multinationals, I can tell you, government is often not friendly to multinationals. Multinationals, though, have significant amount of investment. But as someone working with MNCs, I would say to them, it's not just what's happening in one of these 8 countries. It's what's happening to them relative to somewhere else where we could put our investment. Two pieces of data that I often use and I would just flag to you, but I'll wrap it up. One just came out today. It's a Transparency International Perceptions of Corruption report. Often Asian nations don't like this. Asia doesn't fare very well. And I'll let you look it up because I don't want to pick on any of the 8 nations. But to be honest, Bhutan does the best. Small little Bhutan, I think they're number 31. But every other member of ICIMOD is way down on the list of perceptions of corruption. And defend you all, they are perceptions, it's a lagging indicator. But we talk about business. Corruption is an enemy of business. And the other piece of data I would share with you is go look up online the World Bank's Doing Business report, the ease of doing business. Of all these 8 countries, I think they look at 200 countries. Of these 8 countries, actually China does the best. But even China is ranked number 80. And so, good for China. But when you think about all these other nations that are in ICIMOD, they're all worse in the World Bank assessment of how to do business there. And so again, if I'm an investor and I look at this, why would I invest in any of these countries when I can invest elsewhere? So government, you know what you need to do. You need to create that enabling environment for business, address issues like rule of law and corruption if you really want investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, time is very tight, but this is a dialogue, so I would like to very briefly at least open the floor to take 2 or 3 questions. 1, 2, 3. If you could state your name, this gentleman here, the first. State your name and your organization, if you will, please.
My name is Neer. I'm representing Max Pro. It's a social marketing organization. My question is to Mr. Dawadi, and I believe the representative from Nimbus also could join in. My direct question is, where does the ROI and the development partners goal actually meet? And in Nepal's context, I have had an opportunity to work in microfinance sector, especially on mobile banking, which is being projected by the government of Nepal as the single most transformative tool for inclusive growth in Nepal. The Nepal Rashtra Bank is proposing this as a tool to get the people from the bottom of the pyramid to join the mainstream banking services. But a small experiences that I've had, I've worked in a donor-funded mobile banking project, and I've had to answer queries from a bank manager, what is the investment on return? So that's where, there's a conflict between the utilization of the development agency's money and the ROI of the private sector. So you as a representative from a private sector, where does the ROI and the development partner goal actually meet so that it's very synergistic, like the Nimbus representative actually highlighted? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We had a second question here, and then one more in the back, and then we'll...
I think it is... that dialogue is very timely because if I give an Indian example, the companies are now mandated to spare their 2% of the profits for CSR. So we have already started having the private sector. Now coming to my question, since we are talking about the inclusive growth in the sense of the Himalayan region, where the magic word profit is always not working because of the limited number of the beneficiaries or the consumers. So I was wondering whether the transboundary approach for finding or increasing the market in terms of in the bordering countries could be an approach. Do you think that transboundary approach can also be adopted by the private sector to increase the number of customers and achieve the target of next of profits?
Thank you. One more question before we get some answers. And then we'll try and squeeze in one more round if I get the okay from the organizer.
I'm Samrit Zara from Pakistan. I have to make a comment on the comment by the private sector from my right side first. You raised a number of questions regarding inclusiveness in drivers and enablers. So here is a response from the public sector. When we talk about inclusiveness and inclusive growth, that means people-centered growth. What's the job of the government sector or the public sector? That is to make inclusiveness profitable. That's, you talked about that we need to, the public sector has to understand the language of the private sector, and private sector has to understand the language of the public sector, and then there is a productive partnership. I will quote you an example. Microfinance institutions provided loans to the poor people. They did it because it was profitable. But then they didn't focus on the clients first. And what happened? The poor people fell sick and they couldn't pay their loans, and so many people committed suicide. Then the private sector realized, and also the international community realized, that we need to perhaps focus on the clients, on the people. So they started investing small money on the health of the poor people and realized that this is profitable as well. So the public sector's stance is that inclusiveness is profitable for the private sector. So is the CSR, corporate social responsibility. It is not something in charity, it is something that is profitable for the private sector as well. So the growth should be driven by the private sector. My point is that it should be driven by the private sector, but the private sector should take the people along. They shouldn't leave the people behind. It shouldn't be a solo walk. And the government sector speaks for the 99% of the people, and so do the development sector people. So our wishes are not only just the wishes, they represent the voices of the 99% of the people. Thank you.
There were some direct questions, so I think the three of you do want to respond directly.
Starting with a thank you to that lady. I didn't get your name, I'm sorry, but I do understand that, and what I'm trying to emphasize on this note is that there needs to be more dialogue with private sector involved, and private sector apology to all of you here that we don't understand you too well. I'm sorry, but we need to understand you better. This is all I wanted to say there. On the balance between ROI and social sector or developmental sector investment, that's a very tricky question. That if social sector is investing into something, does it mean that I don't look at my ROI? Or vice versa, if social sector has an important agenda where there is a social benefit, should it not be done whether private sector is involved or not? I can answer this in only questions, but this is a very tricky balance that we need to arrive at. And only thing, if I was to partner with you or the project that you're bringing in, I would look at if there is a social benefit happening and it's not hampering me in any way, I probably would give in. Or you have to show me a picture which probably I have not been able to see and would be consolidating my business in over a longer period of time. But one of the two must happen.
I think Anandji has already answered, and I have nothing to add. We have to look at if in the private sector, if let's say if there is social investment and private sector is going to make money out of it, they will be involved in it. But that if it is not sustainable, then the business as such may not be sustainable. But the private sector at that point of time it is profitable, and they may get involved in it. That we have to be a little cautious, and we always have to look into what would be the return on investment in terms of the social sector also.
Responding to Dr. Pushkin's question whether transboundary market linkages are a possibility, the answer is yes. However, there is a very strong role of technology and various service providers. When I say service providers, I talk of logistics, I talk of warehousing, I talk of all those players who are in the value chain to be part of it. Because what we do today, when we are trying to develop the Connect platform, bringing the end beneficiary to the marketplace and service providers, we are looking at all these various players in the value chain to enable what you are referring to. And just as a case in example, what we saw this morning in this morning's presentation is about bay leaves, how bay leaves are coming to India, and Nepal being one of the largest producers of bay leaves, and bay leaf being a very important ingredient in the Indian spice market. I think it's not a remote possibility, it's a very strong possibility. But yes, we do have to harness technology and the various other players in the value chain to make it a possibility.
Just quickly, because we're running out of time, a couple quick comments for the 2% mandate on companies for CSR. I think again, it's all about language. I always say to people that corporate social responsibility isn't what you do with your money, whether it's 1% or 3%. It's how you make your money, and I think we need to understand how businesses make money versus saying you got to spend 2% on cleaning up a beach or doing something. It's not sustainable projects like that. For the question about return on investment, Myanmar is opening up. I spend a lot of time now back and forth with Myanmar. And one of the things that Myanmar, to its great credit, has done, it's beginning to open up some of its industries. And so they open up very competitive some awards for the telecom sector. And I think a Qatari company, a Norwegian company, won the award. But government can say, in bidding for this award, you might have to provide service to some underserved area, in addition to all the money you're going to be making serving urban areas. And so business will make a decision based on doing that math as to how I want to structure my bid. So there is a way to structure things that meet some broader goals, that if it was just a poor business decision about that tiny market, we might not serve. There are things that governments can do in these areas. But I think, overall I would say, what a great step that ICIMOD has done in trying to at least bring a little bit of dialogue here. The opening question Leena said was, should business or can business be involved in shaping policy? Of course they can, and business wants to, but I find government doesn't invite them to shape policy. And so if there's one specific thing I would ask of all of you, whether it's working through industry groups or chambers of commerce or individual leading businesses, I would hope that government, before they impose more rules and regulations, reach out to business and understand the impact of these rules and regulations before yet impose them. And likewise, a place like ICIMOD, if they could work with the business community to help shape some of the research that you're doing and not feel that you're tainted because business is helping finance some of your research, that would be another specific great step forward.
Thank you very much, and I'm really sorry for having to cut the discussion short.
I won't expect the answers. I'll just summing up the whole discussion about industry is too important a question to be left like this. So I will not raise any other question which I have here. If you look at the plan document and the growth rates, 50% of investment for the growth rate to be achieved has to come from private sector. That's one. That's to log in first. You can look at the web and find out. Now the issue which we really be discussing is, could there be a business model for sustainable development? There's a total rephrasing of the question. Think of it. Look at all the parameters of business doing. Could there be a business model for sustainable development? I don't expect any answers. Do kindly reflect on it.
Yeah, thank you very much for raising this important question. And I think to close, maybe I think the key takeaway from this session is that indeed 50 minutes are just not enough for what we all agree is a very important dialogue. So maybe if we can leave this session with just a note for future reference that this is an important dialogue started, but we really need to be sticking our heads together to continue that dialogue in various platforms and in constructive ways, ensure that we do actually understand each other, ensure that we identify the areas where there are true synergies, ensure that we start phrasing some of the key issues we're looking in form of business models so that we actually can start moving forward jointly. Thank you very much, and apologies for the rush.